Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Relf, and I'm one of the Associate Directors of the SBS Corps here at Duke CFAR. Joining me today is Amy Cornelli, the CFAR SBS Corps Director, Nika Moloku and Jamila Taylor, who are two of our extraordinary staff who keep us moving forward and help organize these things. And so we're very appreciative to the three of you, as well as our two guest presenters. As a reminder, the Social and Behavioral Sciences Corps of Duke CFAR is available to support scientists in a variety of ways, including mock grant reviews, think tanks to kind of help develop proposals. We're available to help you with a launch meeting of a new grant, manuscript reviews, and so forth. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. On December 1st, World AIDS Day, the SBS Corps and Duke CFAR will be hosting the new Dean of the School of Nursing, Dr. Vincent Guillermo Ramos, who is going to present his research and then meet with the Social and Behavioral Science Corps afterwards to discuss some priorities that he sees from his role as a member of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS. And then in late January or early February of 2022, we are going to be hosting Dr. Greg Greenwood of the National Institute of Mental Health and Dr. Brenda Curtis of the National Institute of Drug Abuse to learn more about the recently released NIH Stigma and Discrimination Toolkit that was released on October 6th. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming two of my colleagues from the School of Nursing, Christin Daniels and Jessie Byrd. Christin is the Assistant Dean for Research Development in the School of Nursing and is responsible for the operational direction of the Center for Nursing Research. Although she's only been at Duke for 2 years, she's had a tremendous impact already, and we're very appreciative that she's sharing her expertise with our community today. And Jessie Byrd is a clinical research coordinator in both the School of Nursing and the School of Medicine, particularly the Department of Orthopedic Surgery. She previously worked at Sanford School of Public Policy in the Center for Child and Family Health, and her educational and research interests focus on equitable healthcare and social services to improve patient outcomes. We all know that in the world of HIV and that there's significant issues of racial inequity and justice issues. And today, Jessie and Christin who have been the co-leader of the School of Nursing's Racial Justice Research Task Force, an action-oriented group comprised of faculty, students, staff, and alumni, will focus on practical solutions to infusing equity into the everyday research activities. What we'll ask them to do is do their presentation, and if you want to put your questions in the chat as the conversation unfolds, once they're done, we'll engage in a dialogue as a community. But Jessie and Christin, thank you very much for taking time from your busy schedules to share the important work that you and your task force are doing. So welcome.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear us? Okay, great.
Great.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you so much, Michael, for the introduction and for the context and also for the invite. We're really excited to be here, and we're really excited that there's some interest in our tool, and happy to share with you today. And also, mostly, we would love your feedback and your insight on how this might be something that we can continue to improve so that it becomes a useful tool for researchers as they go through the research life cycle. So I'm going to share my screen if I can. I'm going to try, Michael. Might need to let me, somebody might need to let me.
You should have permission already, but if it doesn't work, let me know, Christin.
It says I cannot start the screen while the other participant is sharing.
All right, try now.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. Are you seeing PowerPoint? Okay, great. All right. So DUSON Infuse. Infuse is an acronym that stands for Implementing a New Focus on Equity in Research. And today, Jessie and I will present, mostly Jessie, will present this tool to you. And this is on behalf of our, as Michael said, our Research Racial Justice Task Force at the School of Nursing. And if I can get it to advance, there we go. So just a quick brief overview of our Research Racial Justice Task Force. I guess it was more than a year ago now, the school mobilized a bunch of task forces related to related to racial justice in the aftermath of George Floyd and others. And I'm sure we were not the only ones to mobilize task force across Duke or across higher ed in general. But our task force came together as a task force that was action-oriented rather than recommendation-making. So we have a little bit of a different kind of a focus. But our goals, our overview here is that we're wanting to address urgent, longstanding need in nursing research for actionable plans, contribute to racial justice initiatives, complementing other task forces at our school, identify, implement strategies to meet research-specific needs, share lessons, and then also, and it's co-led by staff and faculty, students, staff, faculty, and alumni, and led by staff and faculty. All right. So the goals of our task force are these 4 goals: generate new knowledge, particularly related to disparities and equity, especially for underrepresented groups in research. A lot of people don't know that that's a primary area for nurse scientists. We are heavily focused on equity and have been forever and probably will be forever as well. Our second goal there is to engage community members as equitable partners and ensure that our research is benefiting the community. Number 3, embed a racial equity lens throughout the research life cycle. And then 4, integrate anti-racist and health equity processes into our research practices. So this checklist is really kind of sort of primarily tackles goal number 3, but infuses, I didn't mean to use that word, but infuses principles from these other 3 goals as well. And I'm going to hand it over to Jessie now to go over the checklist.
Okay, great. So as Christin mentioned, this is one of our task force's first initiatives. We're really hoping it will be useful beyond Duke nursing, across disciplines at Duke and even beyond would be fantastic. So the idea for this checklist began as we started to consider Doosan's currently funded projects, considering how many are health disparities and health equity focused. How could we support more of that work? And then even further, and perhaps more importantly, for those that may not fall under what we consider health disparities or health equity, how can we ensure that these projects still address and incorporate equity throughout? So we designed an interactive checklist and self-assessment to really help research teams across disciplines embed an equity lens throughout the research lifecycle. It's organized into the 4 stages of the research lifecycle listed here and includes really actionable and practical steps and resources specific to those stages, and then community engaging strategies are really integrated throughout. As I mentioned, there's a self-assessment that we envisioned for research teams to use in grant writing. Perhaps they could be incorporated into mock reviews. And then we're still working to develop somewhat of a comprehensive glossary of terms and resources. So Christin, you can go to the next slide. And so this is the cover page of our checklist. It provides in narrative form what I just described kind of as the purpose and the goals, and then also a neat little infographic depicting the 4 stages of the research life cycle. You can head to the next slide. So we've been told that it's a little content heavy and it's a little bit long, and that it's helpful to have a visual as we sort of go through what is a little bit content heavy. So I'll just sort of highlight a few key points from each section as I go through it. So the first stage is planning and preparation, and we focus on research team selection, team building, and administrative review. So some of these checklist items include developing a diverse research team that adequately reflects the study population. We recommend going beyond a blanket statement to develop a community advisory board and really specifically describe how you will involve the community and what work you've done to ensure that those plans for engagement will be successful. We highlight promoting a positive work environment. So this is, regularly scheduled check-ins with your study team, discussing preferred workflows and making sure that there are adequate equity and other professional development training opportunities. We list reviewing administrative documents and processes through an equity lens, and then also ensuring research teams have access to institution-specific equity initiatives and resources.
And I just want to chime in before I switch. The administrative processes are particularly important to think about from an equity lens with regard to international research, which is basically what a lot of you do. So we know that that's part of a main factor for what we're talking about here. You want me to go to the next slide, Jessie?
That'd be great, thanks. And then developing the proposal is probably our largest section with a few subsections throughout. So primarily we focus on the context of the research question, encouraging research teams to consider historically what has research looked like in this community. What is the impact of current or previous inequity, and how might that influence participants' willingness to engage in research, or the research team's ability to secure stakeholder buy-in. A lot of funders now like to see a theoretical model. So we referenced the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities Research Framework. And then another thing is just, be creative with innovation. So the idea or the research question itself may not be particularly innovative, but its adaptation or translation to a particular community or setting might make it innovative. You can go to the next slide. Let's see, and then for research design, we really emphasize community perspective here to make sure that the research questions align with the community's needs and interests, to make sure research questions or the work being done may not unintentionally worsen disparities that the community may be facing. Also, community perspective on data collection, do they prefer quantitative, qualitative methods, in-person, virtual, how will you best be able to collect the data that you need? And then also for retrospective studies, thinking about the large data that teams are using, find out more about how the data was collected and, what exclusions or biases may exist in these big, even administrative data sets, and how that might influence analyses. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. We highlight language too, and I recently learned Duke has a ton of language resources that will just review your study materials or recruitment materials to make sure the language is, acceptable and really has a person-centered focus and avoids hierarchical language. And then in budget planning and payments, that's another piece where it's just really important to involve the community to make sure that the payment amount you may be providing participants won't impact any benefits that they may be currently receiving. Consideration for collecting social security numbers and being a bit creative on how you're doing that, and is it possible to not do that, depending on your study population. And yeah, just, asking the community about preferred payment methods. Yes, okay, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. Then our third section, conducting the study, the first two pieces really just expand upon research team and language, which I've briefly described. So we can go to the next slide. I won't spend too much time on that. And then also for conducting the study, we highlight recruitment and consenting. I recently participated in an engagement, recruitment, and retention certificate program, and I think in an ideal world, all research staff would have that training. And so just making sure that your staff is trained maybe in cultural intelligence or implicit bias, that would be great. And considering consent forms that are kind of congruent with the values that research participants may have. And one thing that was highlighted, I think, recently in a work group that we had you know, just because the consent form says this doesn't mean you can't, you know, veer from that script a little bit to meet the participant where they are, and just really helping research staff to understand that and emphasize, you know, the consent and recruitment as more of a conversation and with a person and less of a transaction. Lastly, for conducting the study, we focus on data analysis, and that's something we'll be further developing next week, actually, you know, consideration for data equity, but, you know, making sure you're always analyzing for social determinants of health or performing meaningful subgroup analyses. And then last section. So this is focusing on using and sharing the results. So in the discussion of the results, focus on those social determinants of health and, you know, intersectionality of race with all dimensions of identity that may be relevant, really connecting the results back to the policies that directly impact the study population, and then sharing, you know, where is your work going next, and not necessarily the next grant, but, you know, maybe you're expanding that work to a new setting, you know, explaining how the next phase of your work will really benefit that community. And then for dissemination, you know, asking the community how they might like to receive information. So beyond publications or scientific articles. And then one thing that is just seems to be kind of a common trend and really important is considering how you're going to maintain a relationship with that community once the study's finished. So that was a really quick and somewhat lengthy overview of the content of our checklist. And I'll turn it back over to Christin.
Thanks, Jessie. Excellent summary. And I'll just say at the end there, what Jessie was talking about in terms of dissemination, we just recently got some great feedback, which makes total sense to us, but we neglected to include in, you know, which is this piece about making sure that the literature review that you use in your studies reflects people of color, their work, their contributions, or at least at a minimum that reflects people of the community in which you're studying. So we're trying to make sure that we get that message on that checklist as well, but it's not there yet. All right. So far we've started, we kind of consider this checklist version 1.0. We want to improve it and make it into version 2.0 and maybe 3.0, just depending on, you know, the different steps that we take. So what we've done is we've started using this checklist with our internal grant program that we run through the Center for Nursing Research in the School of Nursing, and then we hope to get some feedback on just very qualitative feedback on what people thought of the tool in the process of creating their grant proposal. And then we've also completed consultations with these groups here, CTSI Community Engaged, Center for Equity and Research, and we've also presented to an advisory council for one of those groups as well. And we're going to continue to revise the current version, continuing to get feedback from different subject matter experts. We would love to do some formal focus groups. We want to make this tool generalizable beyond the field of nursing science, and also easy to use, and, you know, burden-free, if you will. I mean, there should be some burden on researchers to do this work, but, you know, we want to make this something that people will use. And then we're going to write up some manuscripts, and I think we've got plans to present at some conferences as well, and then we'll hopefully disseminate a sort of final version sometime in the spring after we get through some of these steps. Let's see here. Yeah, so the focus groups, this is what we would work on in our focus groups, which we are hoping to conduct sometime soon. And that's it. So now it is time to open this up and get your feedback and questions or recommendations, and we're all ears. And I'll stop sharing if I can.
Thank you, Christin and Jessie. Very helpful. Jessie, when you were talking, you talked about a recent recruitment and retention workshop that you went to that was really helpful.
Yes.
I think there's people that would find that interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, and kind of, you know, what did you find helpful about it? What were the take-home messages for you?
Sure. And I can also send the link in the chat. I think it's offered through CTSI, but I want to say it was an 8 to 10 week.
Oh,
No, I'm sorry. It was over the course of a few months, but it was 8 to 10 courses. And so we did Dr. Nadine Barrett's Just Ask training, which that focused a lot on participant recruitment and consenting and sort of that piece that I referenced about, it's really a conversation. You're not like, how would you explain the study to your friend who's not, familiar with your line of work, and that you don't have to stick to the script. You need to make sure you're following the IRB and the research design, but it's okay to go a little off script to make sure that your participants are comfortable and fully understanding the research. There was another on readability. So that's where I learned about all of those resources at Duke. I think it's the Recruitment Innovation Center. But really, I think one of my biggest takeaways was learning about all of these resources that exist at Duke that I don't know a lot of people, I didn't know about. And now I'm able to use them and provide them as recommendations. So I'll send the link in the chat. I think there is somewhat of an application process. I think you just have to be nominated or something, but it was certainly really helpful. And in an ideal world, I think everyone at Duke, involved in recruitment would be taking that course.
Your point about there's resources at Duke that so many of us don't know about. Like I've never heard about the Recruitment Innovation Center. And so if you have something to put in the chat box, that would be great. And if not, I'll work with you to get it so we can disseminate it to our core, because we've had some recent challenges with recruitment of our population, and we're trying to help scientists and teams improve different approaches. So very timely. Thank you. One of your slides, and I think, Christin, you were talking about this, was the important role of language from an equity lens. And I shared in the chat session on October 6th, CDC just issued a new set of guidelines for inclusive language. And if folks haven't seen that, it's a great resource that goes through a variety of different populations, and they for every kind of traditional statement, they offer an alternative, more culturally congruent, equitable statement. And it's a beautiful tool. So if people haven't learned about that, that's also available in the link. What questions do people want to ask, or open it up to the group? So Kevin, thank you, asks, where can we access the checklist?
You want me to take that one, Jessie?
Yeah, I'll leave that one to Christin.
So Kevin, we're still working on it. So we're not ready to disseminate it widely. We are trying to get some feedback on it and again, kind of tweak it a little bit, make it user-friendly, make sure it considers a large enough context that it can be generalizable. So we don't have it available for use as like a document that we're going to put out there, but eventually and soon we are going to make it available, probably in My Research Path, and also we'll just send it out to people. And it'll be a resource for Duke people in particular. We're not going to publish the checklist itself. There's no psychometrics or anything to this checklist, so we're not going to publish it as a validated tool in the literature, but we're going to have it as an appendix in a manuscript so that people can see it that way as well.
Christin, it's a related question to Kevin's, and part of our core activities is mock reviews for grants, and because of the diverse populations impacted and affected with HIV, STIs, and their profound intersection with intersectionality theory, but also the social determinants of health. If we were to receive a grant application around this lens, is there somebody from your team that we could possibly invite to be one of the mock grant reviewers or help us? Because I think we all have some level of expertise, but the work that you and your task force have done clearly are kind of leading the way. And if an investigator were to access that, would there be a possible connection?
I think that's a great idea, is to have somebody on the mock team who's got some experience with this. We certainly have several faculty members in our school who participated on this task force in developing this checklist. So I don't want to volunteer them without asking, but I think it's a great, I think it's a fantastic suggestion, and I'm sure that they would love to be invited wearing their hats of like an equity, you know, like an equity focus. So I think that would be a great idea.
And I think, you know, when we develop this self-assessment, you know, the idea is we can't really like enforce this anywhere. We can't make anyone use it. We can't require schools or departments, but I think it'd be great if the assessment and the checklist could be incorporated into departmental mock reviews, or you know, that'd be great too.
Yeah. The other piece of your instrument that I found really helpful, and I liked how you said in the dissemination, in the discussion section, to move beyond race as a traditional variable and expand it, particularly in secondary data analysis, to actually extend the discussion section to think about the equity lens, discrimination, racism, systemic oppression, and the social determinants. And it's a really, really important point that you threw out.
Great.
I had a question specifically about what Michael was just talking about. So trying to extend some of these measures. There's a lot of evidence that when we ask white participants to rate their experiences of discrimination, they do not use those measures the same way that participants who are from racial and ethnic minority groups fill out those measures. So did you all run across any examples of ways that we can do that? Or if we're measuring discrimination, kind of deal with the measurement invariance across racial and ethnic groups?
So I'll just say, we don't get into the weeds of measurements of discrimination. However, there is one of our members of our team is a statistician, and he's been through a very comprehensive data equity training as a statistician, so like high level. And so I think what I would recommend is to consult with a statistician who's had some data equity training, and really get advice, and there might be some through Byrd or through us or through others, and really get some advice on stuff like that. I think that would be sort of my thought. Jessie, do you have another idea?
No, that's a great question and a great thought. And like Christin said, I think we're thinking about, with the variables that you do have, make sure you're performing these analyses. And so in terms of considering, discrimination, I think I completely agree with Christin. We're very high level. We're not too much in the weeds there.
That's a great point.
It is. It's fantastic.
I mean, there's a lot of unintended consequences that
right.
fall out of our research, and that's what we're trying to just, a lot of our checklist items are things we all know. It's just a matter of putting it all together, thinking about it all at once, intentionally.
And we may have a point over in the, developing the study or developing proposal, a comment about, that. Consider the measures that you're using, and are they applicable to, all people in your population, and so consideration there, but nothing too specific.
I had a couple questions. Thanks for presenting this. It's really neat to see something so comprehensive that's getting developed. I'm just going from the last to the beginning. This data equity training that you mentioned that a statistician in your group attended. Do you know anything about where that is? Because that would be a great resource for so many people that we run in with between CFAR and Pop Health, where I am. Or any idea how we could find out more about what that is?
Yeah, I can find it for you, Amy. It's it came out. It was advertised through, I think, the National Academies, but it was it's some nonprofit. It's a global nonprofit, and the woman, her name is Heather. Jesse, do you remember her last name?
No, but I know.
We have a side project. Our Research Racial Justice Task Force has another equity project, which is a podcast. And we interviewed her for our podcast, but we have not yet released the episode. And so so I can get you her information. And it was like something that, I think it was like one of those kind of like 2 half-day sessions, and it was like $900 or something. So, I mean, it's, it's a legitimate training course. Yeah. And we sent our lead statistician, and also one of our data science experts to the conference, and they both loved it. And we're getting ready to actually do some reporting out of that conference at an upcoming School of Nursing workshop, but it's not going to be at the level that you should take the actual, course. So, right. But I'll get you that information.
Yeah, thanks. It sounds wonderful. And do you have like a link you could share for your podcast? Because that sounds quite fascinating to be able to listen to that.
Yeah, we're hoping it's good. Right now, we're not so sure. We've done about 10 interviews with various experts around Duke, and also we were able to get an interview with Dr. Shannon Zank, who is the director of the National Institute for Nursing Research. And so we have we're hoping to get those launched soon. We have to do some major editing right now. Make it listenable, and we're hoping to launch that in the spring, like in 2022, like in January, and we can send it to Michael, and then he can share it. And that one was funded by a faculty advancement seed grant.
Yeah, that would be great for us to circulate among CFAR, and then I'm in Pop Health, that we could circulate among Pop Health researchers, because our folks have spent a lot of time thinking about these things too. So that would be
and if we're hoping to get some more. We're hoping to be able to keep the podcast going. If we can just keep, we have a graduate student who runs everything, and we need to keep her funded. So if we can keep her funded, then we're going to keep the podcast going. But there's plenty of people in Pop Health that we would love to interview.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was thinking about too is that we should link you with our DEI group if you haven't already been linked with it, because they may be able to help. Look through the checklist, have people on the DEI committee look through the checklist and give feedback, and who knows, it just would be nice to link you guys together. So I can do that.
Thanks.
Kevin, who's on the call, is part of that committee.
Okay.
But I can link you guys to that, in a follow-up email.
It'd be super helpful.
I did have one other question. So Jesse, you mentioned equity framework, and you had a link to one of them that NIH uses.
Yes.
Do you know of other ones when you were researching these that are good or that you found useful? I know folks are always looking for frameworks, and especially health equity frameworks. And I know there's one that I use frequently, but have you found some other ones that would be good for folks to know?
The one we included is the one that I'm most familiar with, and I think our group kind of highly recommended, but we are in the process of continuing to develop our resources, and we'll hopefully be able to include a few different ones. What's the one that you like to use?
It's the the health implementation. Oh my gosh, I use it on 2 studies.
Oh, it's okay.
It's from Woodward is the author, and it came out, and I think in 2017.
It's the Health Equity Implementation Framework. I can put a link to it real quick in here. I also included ETR's new Health Equity Framework, which I think is really great, but just came out last year.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Sadie. I'm looking at the one that Sarah just sent. Great.
Thanks.
That was all my questions. Thank you.
I think I may have just found the link or the information about the data equity training. I'm trying to make sure it's the right one, but so I can put it in the link. But anyway.
And I'm. Oh, go ahead. No. You go ahead.
I was just going to say one of our cores in the CFAR is the quantitative sciences core.
Great.
And we'll share that with them. And there's between population health and nursing and many other departments and units. It's nice to have these facilitated introductions for information sharing and cross linkages and that kind of thing. One of the things that we just talked about at our last core meeting was having a kind of a mini 2-hour panel discussion workshop and partnering with the Social Behavioral Sciences Core of UNC CFAR to really look at the issues of discrimination, racism, theoretical perspectives. How do you measure it? How do you really meaningfully include it in data analysis? And if we're able to bring that together, it'd be great to co-sponsor that with your group, and we all learn and benefit from each other.
I worked with many of the quantitative experts at the UNC CFAR for years and would love to see them. So
Cool.
happy to work with them for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think one question that I think could maybe be helpful to you all and other groups, but also helpful to us as we continue to revise this, is we gave kind of this overview of a checklist items of the sections. Is there anything that you all feel like you're needing or that's missing in equity research that you wish we'd included, or you're still wanting a bit more information about? Perhaps it was so comprehensive that nothing's missing, but I'd be curious if.
Jessie, one recommendation, and it's an issue domestically but internationally as well, that when so many publications don't get published open access, and so a community member or a scientist from another part of the world can't spend the $50 on a manuscript to download it, that it really becomes another equity issue, that people who want access to it and need access to it can't get access to it.
Yes.
It might be something to consider in the dissemination.
Yes, I love that.
Resources. And again, to your point earlier, Jessie, I recently learned that through the Medical Center Library, every year they have a pot of money set aside that faculty can apply for an open access grant for a publication. And so technically,
wow,
each faculty member can access, the roughly $3,000 once a year for an open access publication. Now it's first come, first serve, and there's not enough money for all Duke faculty, but it's another available resource that if you don't have money in your grant or discretionary account, there's this resource through the library for open access fee payment.
That's great. I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Thank you, Marta. Perfect.
I know it runs out quick though, because we've had some people ask me in July and it was gone like June 13th or July 15th. It was gone for that fiscal year. But yeah, but it's a great program. People should know about it. Yeah.
We'll make sure, Jessie and Christin, there's lots of resources that people are sharing and stuff, that we'll make sure that we get all these for our own SBS core and network dissemination, but we'll make sure that you also get all the stuff that's being put in the chat so that you have it for kind of your toolkit and resource network.
Thank you.
I had one other question, and I apologize if I missed it, but I was curious about it. I didn't see like a section for positionality, which is something that's more used in qualitative work than in quantitative work, but I have been thinking about using in more of my quantitative studies. And I'm curious if I missed it or if it was in there somewhere, or even if there's space in research grants to put a positionality statement in.
I don't quite know what you mean, Sarah. Can you?
Yeah, you're teaching us a lot today. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Amy actually might be a better person, given that you're more of a qual expert than me. But my understanding of it, and the way that we've done it for a recent study of mine, is that it's also called sometimes a reflexivity memo. And so I use the phrase positionality because that's used more in, I guess, cultural studies. But when we talk about reflexivity or positionality, it's sort of how our own background influences the work that we do as researchers. And so in a recent paper, we talked about, like it's an ongoing in prep paper, but we talked about how, so we were focusing on healthcare delivery and implementation for LGBTQ plus veterans, and none of us are veterans. Some of us are LGBTQ plus, and some of us are people of color. All of us have at least a master's degree, if not a graduate degree, and none of us are currently struggling with financial insecurity or food insecurity or any of the things that come up for this patient population. So it was kind of just a chance for us to kind of reflect on that and the bias that sort of lends into our work, whether we want it to or not.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think we talk a lot in the checklist kind of about diversity in research teams. How will you ensure, like, if the co-Is don't reflect, or co-PIs don't reflect the population, how will you ensure that you've got the community perspective? But I really like that idea of, and so this is a narrative statement that you would include in a grant proposal or a publication. Is that how this would be presented?
Yeah, I've never put it in a grant. That was part of my question. I've put it in papers before.
Yeah,
that's mainly where I've seen it.
Okay, cool.
And we do mention intersectionality, and there is a paper I just Googled, and a paper popped right up: positionality and intersectionality, and so it kind of talks about them together, and it's in the context of an indigenous population. So those are the perfect kinds of things to add to our resources and our list.
Yes. And I think, we started as a research racial justice task force. And then, as we're developing this checklist, we're like, okay, it's not a racial equity checklist, it's an equity checklist, and so we're really, I think we had feedback to focus more on gender, that was missing. And so we're really excited to hear that recommendation and think about ways that we can make our equity checklist more equitable. And that's something we're going to keep working on as we're putting this document out there, and we want to ensure that the document itself and what we're putting out there is going to achieve what we're preaching for other people, to do in their work. So thank you so much for sharing that.
I had a question. I don't know, Michael, are we out of time? What's our time?
Sorry. We still have about 15 minutes, so please. Oh,
okay. So if we were to think about this checklist in the context of HIV research, and what areas, what explicit areas do we need to think about adding? Stigma comes to mind. I don't know if medical mistrust might be in there. Like what are the other kinds of areas that we would want to think about if we were to, again, kind of couch this in sort of an HIV/AIDS related context?
Yeah.
Or international, both, domestic or international.
It's a brilliant question. I'll offer a few to start us off. Clearly, the various forms of stigma, including intersectional stigma, discrimination in its multiple forms. And, one of the instruments that sometimes is used is the everyday discrimination scale, but pros and cons again. There's also, so your point about a moment ago of international studies, and to me, this is a very sensitive issue to me, that when you're doing a grant submission, how do you do equitable budget development with international partners? And it's, yes, salaries may be lower. And so rather than, just because somebody has a $20,000 faculty salary in Tanzania, and you can, put them on 20% for a grant at $4,000, well, what other things are you including in the grant that's equitable, open access fees, some, international travel to go to meetings. And those are other things that need to be thought about. Also with our community partners. Are we paying for our community partners to go to the National HIV Prevention Conference? Are we paying for our community partners to join professional organizations and going to developmental activities? But I'll stop and let.
I think that's really hugely important what Michael was just talking about in terms of community partners and figuring out ways to be equitable and just making sure that they are paid, because we do see lots of times where we have community partners that are helping a lot and we feel like it should be voluntary, and it shouldn't be. They're contributing to the research. They should get paid, and it isn't just salary. Like, what are all those other things? But also to really, and this may have been in your checklist, but really find out, what they want their roles to be on the project, and also what titles they want. With these NIH grants, we have to give everybody titles, and sometimes we go for co-I because that's what ours are, are investigators, and sometimes community members want that and sometimes they don't. And so it's, to have that really good conversation in terms of roles, but also titles, and making sure they are equitable, but also that we aren't making assumptions on what we think is equitable, but it may not be what community members want. And so to have all those really good, transparent conversations up front.
Yeah, I remember at UNC we had a big lesson that we learned, and I might get some of the details right, but essentially we had a business partner on the ground in Vietnam who could hire employees as UNC employees, but as soon as they became UNC employees, their pay was significantly higher. We kicked them into a wealthy class on accident by paying them what a UNC employee would make in that pay range. And it was actually a huge problem because there were other employees working in the same organization getting paid the Vietnamese going rate. And we created a huge inequity, and we had to, I don't remember how we solved it, but it required vice chancellors and council, international council, and it was a big lesson that we learned. So, and it's a really important point. Yeah. Well, that's helpful to think about already. Just something simple like, what titles do you want? That's a really helpful, practical tip.
Hey, Kristen, I was going to make another
hi, Marta.
suggestion. And it strikes me as maybe being most relevant for international collaborations, but maybe not. But that's capacity building so that future studies can also be led by collaborators, and figuring out when is the right time, or how to best transition that so that the research can be led by those that are most impacted by the problems that are being addressed by the studies.
Yep. So can capacity building go into budgets?
I think it goes across from the conception, being involved in grant writing, being involved in analyses, being involved in publications, authorship order, budgets definitely to support specific trainings, but I think it's also just involvement throughout.
Marta's point's a very important one, and sometimes if the program announcement doesn't specifically include capacity building, you can do it in other ways. Attending the International AIDS Conference is a capacity building activity where they're presenting, networking, and collaborating, but having the intentionality to do those kinds of things. Having Duke investigators may go there and Tanzanian investigators may come to Duke, and while they're at Duke, they have these 3-4 activities that are related to capacity building and development, and vice versa.
Right, makes sense. Yeah. Very helpful.
I think another piece about that is also authorship. Why can't the community member be the first author or the senior author or the technical and community advisory board all listed as co-authors because they contributed, or at least acknowledged at the minimum.
Mhm.
Does anybody have any other questions for Jesse or Christin, or do you have any other questions for us?
I don't think I have anything else right now, but we would love to reach back out through Michael as needed, or as we start thinking through our next steps.
Jesse and Christin, as we're finalizing the dates for the two people at NIH who developed the Stigma and Discrimination Toolkit, we'll make sure that you have that in your task force because they may want to participate in, these are called Rocket Talks, to hear more about that toolkit and its integration into your equity work. And
Great.
either going to be the last week of January or the first week of February. We're just figuring out the details, but we'll let you know soon.
Great. Thank you so
And-
much.
And as a person who runs a center and is responsible for programming, what is a Rocket Talk?
I'll let Amy explain.
Okay.
So it's just a talk. It's just we get together just like this where we share ideas that help build capacity of the CFAR investigators. And so the beginning of the pandemic, somebody on our group came up with this idea to change it to Rocket Talk because it's on Zoom and they thought it was, rocket
Okay.
taking off. So it's just basically how we interpret it is just really an opportunity for, all these people to get together, mostly virtual now, only virtual now really, and just share these ideas and just build capacity, and really letting people know all these different resources at Duke. There's just so many places we can tap into that we just don't know about. And now, we know about your checklist coming and all this exchange is exactly, what we hope to do with all these different talks we have. So we have 3 per semester.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for including us as one of them. We're highly flattered.
Well, thank you very much for coming because this is all great to hear.
That's right. Again, thank you both. A reminder, on December 1st is our next Rocket Talk, and it's going to also be with the larger Duke CFAR, and it will be kind of our World AIDS Day event, followed by a discussion with the SBS Corps about some national initiatives and what it means for social and behavioral science research. Everybody be well. Thank you again, Jesse and Christin, very helpful.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in touch.
All right.
All right.
See you
Thank you
guys.
so
everybody.
much. Bye.